At the end of last year, we bought the cheapest fuel-injected dual sport we could buy new, the Hawk DLX 250, which cost us about $2,000 on Amazon. The bike was delivered, Case and I built it, and pretty quickly we were off riding. Now we've done a number of videos with this bike. Roman took it off-road at IMI Motorsports Complex, Case tested it on the road here in Boulder, and then we had our man Andy give his 2 cents on the bike at his own private oval track. Andy ended up taking a fall on the Hawk, and that's when the real fun with this bike started. The bike stopped running, and once we did get it back up and going, it lasted a whole 30 seconds before we destroyed the rear tube, and more problems kept arising every time we looked at the thing in the wrong way, it seemed like. Since then, Andy's gone through the entire bike to get it to a condition that's even better than when it was delivered to us brand new. So in this video, let's dive into some of the issues that you can expect to have to deal with when buying a Chinese-made dual sport off of Amazon. And just in case you haven't seen any videos with Andy yet on this channel, he has decades of experience inspecting, maintaining, and repairing motorcycles professionally. He's a total expert when it comes to Chinese clone engines just like this one, having spent years tuning small displacement scooters, so I feel like there isn't a better guy to fix the Hawk than Andy. All right, Andy, so you've got the Hawk DLX up on the lift here. Kind of walk me through what the first steps were when you started taking this apart.
Well, obviously, replacing the inner tube. As I remove the wheel, we can see it's spinning nicely now. It's nice and smooth. We had chain adjustment issues that we also resolved on this. But this was my first finding, was right now we're looking pretty good and smooth on that back wheel, but there was no grease in this axle. Either side of the wheel and the wheel bearings were absolutely dry. It got a nice douse of grease, so this thing is so much happier. Battery again, clean terminals, just getting stuff squared away. Added a tube to drain. This is for the vent as you're running, and especially with a tilt like this with the vent down, you got to get that stuff down to the bottom of the bike. So that is all now coming underneath and will not be any problems. Welds, any of the areas that this would actually blow acid out on would go completely rusty. I sanoed all the switch cases on both sides to the handlebars, some zip ties to keep things down. Keeping cables behind the instrument cluster is a must. Anything hanging outside is just that capable of being caught or torn or putting you down. Could be a crash. These things are round and black. That's about the most you get from them. I think Case has already found that out. I found that out more so when I changed the inner tube to the back wheel, how that was a very soft sidewall tire, so it's not going to have good handling characteristics. This was another thing I fixed up. As you can see, these are the parts that are left from the stock rear brake switch. So when you hit the brake pedal, that pulls that, goes up here to the lead and throws the light on for your brake. Wasn't functioning when these guys brought it. They had showed me that was the first thing. It was broke. Just so you know, this is a 1970 CT70 Honda brake light switch. First thing and foremost that you really always want to do is change the oil that's in it, what it comes with. It really is an important feature, especially when this only has 35 miles on it, and it looks like that. Thing was overfilled about 1/3 of a quart. The window and the stick were both way full, so that would be my intention anyway, to drop this oil and get it out. But when I put oil back in, I was like, that's gotta be too much. So it's a little less than a full quart is what I put in here to get a bubble in the window and the right line on the dipstick. But I think that's probably one of the most important things you can do to these Chinese bikes, is get that oil out of there and put something good in there.
All right, so Andy got the bike all touched up and he was ready to deliver it back to us, but he decided to wash the bike as a nice gesture, and yeah, the bike wasn't happy. It's now showing a check engine light and it's not running too well, is that right?
Yeah, no, it's completely missing. It will start, but it's probably in a limp mode. Protocol I was doing down here on this gooseneck to the intake of the fuel injection was wide open. When I took that off, I removed it without even putting a tool on it, and water came out, so it took a big gulp of water, obviously, from wash I did on it. I don't use pressure washers, nothing like that. This was just regular garden hose with a sprayer knob. This has happened to me before when I worked in the shops. Chinese scooters, real sensitive on the electrical side. So I'm kind of not so happy about it, but as Alex showed you up here with the check engine light, there are some protocols that we can do, which Alex and I will do here when we're done, by keystrokes. It will actually come back, that will flash at you, and depending on how many flashes it has is how many you count, gives you a code, and you go after and do the research into what's going on with that particular unit. We'll go 1, 2, 3. Which is a 0. 1 flash. That's 1. So now it's going right back to doing the same thing over again. It will repeat itself. So we had 3 codes pulled there. Wow, that's pretty scary. Not sure why it's so unhappy over a little water ingest. It's looking like, indicates the engine control module, ECM, has seen an ECT sensor output more than 4.91 volts DC, and that's a temperature range for that. So let's look up the next one here. Oh boy, again, the spike obviously was in water going from a positive to a ground situation. So what I need to do here, probably now that it's been 4 days since this happened, things should be dry. If I can get in here to clear the code, that it doesn't go back to a self-help fix type situation, because that's what most of these things will do as well. They'll read, they'll run, and they'll correct themselves and make the right situation to get it running back to normal. That's the one benefit you get with ECMs and computers. So we'll see what we can do to get this thing to make that check engine light go away. Not happy.
Not happy at all.
It's not happy, so what it does is it puts it into a fault code of not running good so that you don't hurt the thing, and because you can cause a lot more pain than what we have going on here.
Yeah, and also the fuel pump is purging
very long.
Way long.
Way too long. It's about half of that spot on a normal key trigger to start this bike. It was just amazing. So we'll do that again. Now it's not even going.
So Andy, you also think this bike has a major breathing problem, don't you?
We always want to get the maximum amount of air into the air box. It's really important here in our environment. Every air box has a snorkel, and this is the snorkel. This is the air intake that comes into it. When these are put in, they are set up by the factory for sea level. So, as you can see, I just increased the amount of air that came into this air box. This was the stock pieces. So you can see the size that I just doubled my intake of gulp, air coming into the air box itself for this thing to run. Now the same thing here on the gooseneck. This is from the air box to the fuel injection throttle body. As you can see, this is very choked as well. 90-degree day. You're riding on the street, the engine temperature, all the heat that's around here. As you accelerate, this is just going to close in on itself and shrink. So you're reducing the amount of air coming into it. This is another stranglehold. This is choke down.
This is probably the same airbox they use on the carbureted model.
Yes, that's my deal here, being that they offer this motorcycle with a carburetor. The intake manifold and the carburetor are shorter in distance between what we have here and the cylinder head. between the fuel injection and the carburetor. So this is longer, and as you can see, being pushed back is going to kink this whole thing.
This O-ring to seal off the airbox on any other motorcycle would go all the way around?
It'd always be one piece. Not this is the way this comes. This wasn't one solid O-ring and then it broke. This is very typical of the quality of things that need to be addressed. This isn't going to be an air issue. What this is going to be is a water issue.
All right, so I dug out the questionable owner's manual that came with the Hawk DLX. We have some wiring diagrams in here. Andy's going to look through this and try and do some research to figure out exactly what is going on with the Hawk and work on getting these engine codes cleared, get that check engine light taken care of so that we can eventually move this on to somebody else.
Everything's dialed in. I can actually just come over here, pull trigger. Light. No check engine light. Idle's real nice, takes throttle.
Sounds way better.
Yes, much happier.
So Andy, this is the Delphi computer, the ECU basically, that we were talking about, right? And
yes.
You said this is a pretty common unit. You were able to find a good amount of info online?
Yes, for sure. I just Delphi MT09 or MT05. I Googled that. This is the code right here. This is the upgraded software version. If this was the older one, this is 0.2. If this was not here and it was just an MT05 module, I wouldn't be able to do what I did to it. So this is the upgraded version. This is a reader. It will self-heal, self-check, self-run.
So by self-heal, you mean that if you just cut power to this, it'll basically forget its memory and relearn everything?
Yes, and I accelerated that. You don't have to do anything to cut power. Obviously, if you're going to cut power, always take the ground strap off first. So what I did to accelerate that and really clear the module is I put a jumper lead from that ground strap to the positive when this was disconnected. So what that does is just puts that loop together and it shuts everything down. I unplugged both leads here, took the module out, put it on my bench for 3 days, let it sit, came back and started the process over just like they would in the factory. Bike barely ran, but it started, and then all the parameters started kicking in as you start blipping throttle. And then I put 20 miles on it out on the back track.
How many laps is that?
That is 200 laps.
200 laps on the Hawk DLX. Crazy
and
man right here.
That's both directions. You know, putting some good generous time on throttle. So right to full throttle, right all the way back off to stop. I didn't do much shifting. It wasn't beating on it. I wasn't hurting it. It was really just telling the brain, this is how we want to break this bike in. And right now it is running a lot better. I don't know what else to say on that, but it's probably also the most expensive piece on the unit.
So yeah, thank God the computer reset itself. Andy was able to just put some more miles on the bike and everything started to sort itself out. But there's a couple other things he did to get this back in tip-top shape.
Liquid nails, it's not like we're using that. But when this product is used up and gone, these containers are very solid plastic and they work really good. So when this is pushed all the way in, I used about this much off the end of it. And you can see that's about where I have this. This is where it ends to bring this all back out to a nice hard area. So basically this is just a quick fix to make that not collapse and keep that wide open. It made a big difference in how this thing runs now.
Now this was one of your main concerns, Andy, when you first rode this bike. By the way, if you haven't seen that video where Andy took this around his track in his backyard, definitely go check that out. It was a lot of fun, but you really didn't like these brakes and you also came up with a good fix for those too.
Yeah, it really, you know, when I worked in the dealerships, you know, PDIs were always a really important part of getting a bike ready for a customer to go down the road, pre-delivery inspection. So in my process, that's what I did to this bike. The brakes on this bike were not functioning like they should. They were very soft and I just couldn't get them to heat up. So what I did down here is I did a little measuring, got my calipers out, and noticed that the whole caliper system here was about 2 millimeters off this way. So I shimmed 2 millimeters to the inside of the wheel, put some grade 8 Honda fasteners in here, use Loctite, and put it all together. Now we've got a rear brake. It's more centered on the rotor. The whole caliper wanted to move over this way when you were pressing the brakes, so that's why the brakes weren't working very well. Now they actually stop.
And you said the spokes were also like laughably loose?
Yes, every one of these spokes, front and rear wheels, rear was the worst. I was getting anywhere from a half a turn to 3 turns to tighten up the spoke nipples on this wheel. The front wheel wasn't as bad. It's typical for a rear wheel that's under load for power and braking. Other than that, everything's all happy and sano on that again.
Now, Andy, you were telling me a pretty funny story. You had this out on your track and you noticed that the exhaust note changed and you had no idea what was happening.
It was, I had already done 190 laps. Every 10 laps is a mile. I switch directions just to keep myself in a balanced situation. So I'm always kind of looking over the bike as I'm doing that to make sure things aren't falling off. The last 10 laps I did, I was like, wow, the exhaust note changed. That was unusual. What's going on? So I finished my 10 laps, stopped, and just noticed that the turn signal was dangling right here at the exhaust. It still works, believe it or not, but we couldn't let that go like that. So everything we've done to this bike, purchased, Amazon, turn signals, Amazon, new tube, Amazon. We just figured we'd stay with the program here and get everything we needed from Amazon with this bike. Owner's manual. It's got everything in it about this bike, and really important stuff that most of you, even if you can't understand it, be a good idea to go through it, because if you're having problems, a lot of them are in this book.
All right, so I think what we've learned through all this is that it's a good bike. There's good components on the bike. The motor you think is good, the ECU you think is good, but the way it comes, you need to put a lot of work into it to make sure you're not gonna run into more issues. And yeah, no one else is doing that work for you like you would see at a dealership with a Honda.
For sure, and that's what a dealership offers you with setup. So even if you purchase the bike and you had a dealer set it up and you paid them to do that, they're gonna do basically what I did, a pre-delivery inspection.
Now here's a question for you. If I wanted to buy this and let's say I had no experience working in my garage on a motorcycle, I had no tools, could I bring this to your everyday motorcycle mechanic? Would they be willing to work on this?
That's a good question. When I worked at the shop that I did for 10 years, I was one of those mechanics. I had no problems working on anything that had 2 wheels that people brought in. The dealership was a little tricky. You know, the biggest thing you have to get by with asking a dealer to set up a bike that you purchase from Amazon like this would be the service writer. You're gonna pay, I would imagine, not any less than $150, but up to $400 or $500 to do what I just did to this bike.
And there you have it. That's going to wrap up our coverage of the Hawk DLX 250. If you're going to buy a new motorcycle and skip the dealership process, make sure you or someone else who knows what they're doing gives it a full safety check before you go out and ride. Clearly, there were a lot of things that needed attention right out of the box, and for a bike that's so accessible to beginners, that's not something most beginner riders will want to deal with. At the same time though, there's definitely a place for brand new and affordable off-brand motorcycles, especially today when good used bikes are becoming much harder to find for reasonable prices. We definitely had lots of fun with the Hawk, but last week we moved it onto a new home to make room for some new toys, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to head on over to tflbike.com so you don't miss any stories in the motorcycle world, and we'll catch you in the next video.